How do you feel when you walk into a room full of strangers? Are you uncomfortable, anxiously scanning the crowd for a familiar face? Do you feel uneasy like I do sometimes at the thought of making conversation with someone you don't know? Conversation is an important part of life. Talking with someone else stimulates us. It provides new ideas and enables us to explore ideas we already have. Think about this. Every friendship that has enriched our lives began with a conversation. Conversation also plays an important role in our success in life. Do you know people who can carry on a conversation with just about anyone? Within minutes, they put people at ease by their conversation. Anyone can learn this skill with practice. Today, I'm going to be talking about 4 levels of communication and how we can have more successful conversations. The first level of typical first-time communication is small talk. This is when we make remarks about the weather, our immediate situation, or current events. Small talk might seem superficial and meaningless, but it really does have its purpose. The second level of communication is fact disclosure. This is when we share facts about ourselves that are not very personal, like where we work or go to school, or what a hobby of ours might be. The third level of communication is viewpoints and opinions. This is when we might share our views or thoughts about politics or our feelings about a mutual acquaintance. The fourth level of communication is personal feelings. This is much deeper than levels 2 or 3 sharing. It's where we might share something like a concern we're having with one of our children who's having problems, or a crisis that we're having at work and our deep fear of losing our job. Conversations that are successful typically begin at level 1, move at a very comfortable pace through levels 2 and 3, and end up at level 4, but not necessarily in the first meeting. Sometimes it might take several meetings and long conversations until a conversation reaches level 4. In fact, it can even be quite uncomfortable if in the very first conversation you have with someone, it is suddenly at level 4. Beginning a dialogue with someone you've never met before requires having a positive attitude. It helps to have the conviction not only that every person is interesting, but also that all these interesting people will find you interesting as well. It also helps to believe that you can learn something from every person and that you have a lot to offer others as well. In these initial moments of first-time conversation with a stranger, the subjects generally revolve around 3 things: yourself, the other person, or your current mutual situation. Since people like to talk about themselves and their immediate surroundings, these are 2 very good places to start. You can begin, for example, by asking them, "Are you from around here?" or "How did you come to be working at this place?" or other questions related to your current situation. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say I am at a barbecue honoring my friend Mary, who's having a milestone birthday, and most of the people there are strangers to me. I fix my hamburger and go outside and stand next to somebody I don't know, and I turn to them and say, "So do you know Mary from work?" And he says, "No, I'm her tennis instructor." And I say, "I didn't know Mary could play tennis." And he says, jokingly, "She can't." I laugh and say, "So how long have you been a tennis instructor?" Notice how I picked up on a fact that he shared and carried the conversation into another subject area. Good conversationalists are above all a good listener. He or she has learned to wait for information from the other person and then carries the conversation into another subject area by asking related follow-up questions. Sometimes our initial questions in a first-time conversation only require a yes or no answer, and that is okay. But asking too many of these kinds of questions can make the conversation difficult as we run out of information to ask about. Instead, you can ask open-ended questions that begin with how or what or why. For example, instead of asking, "Are you here on business?" you could say, "What brings you to Portland?" And the person might say, "I'm here for the statewide pumpkin eating contest." And I might say, "How did you get into competing in pumpkin eating?" And he might say, "Well, for starters, my name is Peter, and I had a wife and couldn't keep her." I'd like to end this portion of my speech by telling you a story. When I was a senior in college, my friend Laura and her sister and I drove from LA, where we went to college, all the way up to San Jose for a big college student conference. Students came from all over the western states, and there were actually a couple thousand of us. We arrived very late and got checked into our hotel. The coordinator of the conference told us we had to pack out the rooms with 4 per room, and of course there were 3 of us. We got to our hotel room and opened the door, and there in one of the 2 double beds was somebody already asleep. We got settled in, and before I knew it, Laura and her sister had climbed into the empty bed and were saying goodnight to me. That's when I realized that there was only one option of where I could go to sleep, and that was in the bed that was already occupied. I suddenly felt very awkward at the thought of climbing into bed with somebody that I did not know. I assumed it was a girl, I hoped it was a girl, but still, I didn't know who this person was. They were a stranger. I thought about sleeping on the floor, but had second thoughts on that, at how uncomfortable it would be. So I finished getting ready for bed and very gingerly climbed into the other side of the bed and scooted my body at the far edge of the mattress so I would not touch that other person and they would not touch me. As conflicted as I felt on the inside, I finally fell asleep. The next morning I woke up, looked over, and that other person was still there. And I started thinking about, what am I going to do when they wake up? I could ignore them and just pretend like they're not there. But then I decided I needed to make conversation. So as she was waking up, I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, "This is so awkward. I've been sleeping in the same bed with you all night and I don't even know your name. I'm Suzanne." And she said, "Hi, I'm Catherine." We had a nice conversation and got to know each other a little bit during the conference. 2 years later, I took a job with the organization that had sponsored the conference in another state. I showed up for my first staff meeting to meet my team members, and unknown to me and unknown to her, there in my staff meeting was Catherine. She and I ended up working together for over 5 years and were roommates for a few of those years. We became best of friends. In fact, Catherine was the maid of honor at Ron's and my wedding. And to think our first conversation was the one we had in bed. Yes, I met my maid of honor in bed. Now, I'm not encouraging you to start initial conversation with strangers in bed. However, I am encouraging you to take the initiative with someone today or this week that you don't know. Because you just don't know where that friendship could lead, even if initially it's quite awkward.